Welcome to the Productivity Podcast. Diane Well, CEO and founder of Rendell Intelligence, is back for another chat about how we're faring on the high streets and shopping centres, January to Feb 2025, Di?
Yep, Simon, that's it. That's where we are. So we're coming up to this. That's the second month of the first quarter.
Feels like we're whizzing through the year already. And as we record, the sun's shining, so it does feel like we've turned the corner from winter into spring/summer. So that's a feel-good factor. Where are we with numbers?
Well, it's not disastrous. That's the good news. It's fairly stable. I think I would probably, if I had to sort of sum it up, I'd say steady as she goes. So looking at the key indicators of footfall and sales, of course. So footfall was static in February largely. It was flat on last year. So it rose by 0.2% across all retail channels. So that's high streets, retail parks and shopping centres. And this is footfall into stores. So it's a good indicator of whether people are spending or not. The biggest increase, albeit just 2%, was in retail parks. And that's probably because they're convenient and they've got supermarkets on them, so people have to buy food. Just 0.1% increase in high street and shopping centre retailers. So pretty flat month on footfall. The BRC reported sales of 1.1% up on Feb 2024, and that's the same increase as annual increase happened in Feb 2024, so 1.1. But non-food in-store sales actually fell by 1%. So whilst overall sales, and that includes online and offline, rose, in-store sales on the non-food side declined. And really that probably reflects what's happening in the high street. And Beauclair report on high street sales, specifically in-store high street sales. And in January, in-store high street sales on the high street dropped by 5.4%. So a fairly big drop. And that drop really occurred across all sectors other than household, funnily enough, which rose by 4.7%. But households had a pretty torrid time across the last 12 months. So it's coming from a low.
What do we class as household? What's in that category?
So that's, anything that sells furnishings, soft furnishings, all those sorts of things, anything that's vaguely associated with household, really. So, it's sort of a mixed bag of things. But if we think about our homes, it would be any of those sorts of things that we would find, lighting, linens, that sort of stuff.
Okay.
So, and then, of course, the big thing was the challenging time that fashion was having, and that's still having a challenging time. So 5 sectors account for around 85% of all sales in the high street. So they're fashion, food and drink, general retail, which is department stores and discount retailers, so mixed bag retailers, grocery and health and beauty. And all 5 saw a drop in their sales in February. And the biggest drops were in fashion, still 7.4%, and food and drink. But what separates fashion and food and drink is that they both saw a drop in their sales. The ATV in food and drink, the average transaction value, rose by 3.3%. So those people who were spending on food and drink were spending more. Yep. Likewise, in general retail, the drop in sales of 2.9%, but the ATV rose by 4.7%. So those who were going into department stores were spending more. And in health and beauty, the same picture, 4.7% drop in total sales, but a 3% increase in ATV. So some sectors, whilst, facing fairly challenging terms overall, actually seeing some light at the end of the tunnel, really.
So we're back to the conversation we've had in a few of these previous chats around you've got to be maximising the ability to sell to your existing customers, because it's hard to get new ones or even retain. So you've got to be selling more to the same or slightly less. Absolutely.
Overall, in terms of what dropped, in terms of there's 3 metrics that make up sales: transactions, customers, and ATV. So, how many people are buying, how many transactions they make, and how much they spend. And, there were big drops in both transactions and customers. Transactions dropped by 8.1% in February,
right,
and customers by 6.7%. So you can see that there are just fewer people buying. But the ATV rose by 2.9%. As you said, those people who do have cash, probably older, I would say, less inhibited by heavy mortgage payments, are still spending, because interest rates, whilst they've come down a little bit, are still higher than they were back in obviously 2020 and 2021. So they're getting a bit of return on their investment.
So we've got a cautious nation, I suppose, bracing themselves for, in some degree, national living wage stuff, and if you're an employer. We've got spring statement coming in a week or so. So again, people will be wondering what that's going to include. We've got hopefully the end to Ukraine in sight, and that's impacted petrol prices, I believe. I think they're at kind of an all-time low over the last 2 or 3 years at the moment, and then clearly the madness in America, which changes on a day-to-day basis or an hour-to-hour basis, doesn't it? So it feels like we're still in this holding pattern we discussed before, of people not quite sure, maybe saving more. Is that a thing?
It is. I mean, the latest savings information from the ONS isn't out till the end of March, but in the first few months of the year, and up to the end of last year, savings were at 10%, which is the highest they've been since the pandemic. And I think everyone was feeling, the fact that people had to dip into their savings, really, because, just from the legacy of very high inflation, and people are trying to recoup that. I mean, wage inflation has just come out, the latest wage inflation information, and that's sitting at 5.9%, which is clearly higher than inflation, which is great news. But that doesn't seem to be flowing through into retail spend, particularly. People are being very cautious and holding back on that.
Okay, so similar to what we saw coming out of Christmas, I suppose. Caution, rising costs in mortgages, maybe people still paying off a bit of the spend or overspend from the festive period, but also casting forward into the uncertainty, I suppose, that exists economically and in the world economy. I know, again, at the time of recording, the Bank of England are keeping quite close to their chest what they're going to do with interest rates. Is it up? Is it down? Is it stay fixed? Which can have a significant impact either way.
Absolutely. And people aren't, they don't exist in a bubble. They know that, their employers are making, arrangements and changes to their businesses to try and absorb or offset the increased NI and minimum wage. And, they're seeing these reorganisations within their teams. They're seeing some people leave and not replaced. Some people have got a hold on recruitment. Some people are making redundancies. So it makes people feel very nervous. And that inhibits the amount they really want to spend. Sales were up. Total sales were up by 1%, so it's a marginal increase over the year. But that's not, that's not exciting, really. It's not saying that people are going out there and spending. I mean, in January actually they're up 2.6%, and back in February they now dropped down to 1.1% up. So there's clearly a cautiousness sitting out there amongst consumers.
And I assume in the coming months we'll start to see how that's impacting holiday bookings, all that kind of stuff, as people, again, cast even further forward into the summer.
Absolutely. And I think, it's going to be interesting, again, to see whether the rush for holidays carries on and whether people prioritise holidays and leisure over things. Because clearly, there is some spending to be had when people book holidays, because people want, to upgrade their wardrobes and to buy some stuff to go away with. But generally, if you're spending a fair chunk on a holiday, you will possibly not spend it as much in the high street or in store anyway. So, it's going to be really interesting to see whether the trend for and the demand for holidays carries on this year. I mean, obviously the holiday adverts are out, the offers are out, so that's tempting people already.
Good. Well, we'll pause there. We'll see where we are when we come back and look at February to March, because hopefully the spring statement will have been delivered by then, and we'll know about interest rates and all those other things that people will be slightly anxious about. So thanks once again, Di, and we'll catch up next month.
Thanks, Simon.